Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Green Room. My name is Amrita de Vera. I manage driver lending at Grab. And today I'm excited to be your host for an open discussion on open banking with Todd Schweitzer, the founder and CEO of Brankas, and Arvie de Vera, the head of the FinTech business group at the UnionBank of the Philippines. So today, the Green Room, we are going to, of course, be talking about fintech trends in Southeast Asia, but we also want to get into the unique businesses and experiences of our guests. So we hope to make this an ongoing program. We hope you like it, and please share your feedback after the show. Today, we're going to spend the first 40 minutes talking to our speakers, Todd and Arvie. And then we'll hear from Manish Diwaan from AFIN to talk a little bit about the APIX community. And then we'll reserve the final 15 minutes for your audience questions. So please send those in throughout the discussion in the Q&A box. I'll try to fit those into the conversation, but if not, we've got some time reserved at the end for your questions. So with that, I would like to get us started. So I said we'll talk about open banking. Of course, we're going to have to talk about COVID. But first, let's get to know our guests. So let's start with Todd. Todd Schweitzer, you are the founder and CEO of Brankas. We've actually known each other for a long time. We met as consultants, I think 8 years ago. You had just finished your master's from the Harvard Kennedy School. Before that, you had been doing service work with the US Peace Corps in the Dominican Republic, if my memory serves me. So catch me up. What have you been doing since I saw you as a hotshot consultant in New York City all those years ago? How did you become the founder of Brankas in the Philippines?
Yeah, so thanks, Amrita. Thanks for arranging, and also to the APIX team for co-hosting. So Brankas we started about almost 4 years ago now. And, my journey, I've always been involved with economic development challenges in emerging markets. So I started out in the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps is basically, it's part of the US government, but it basically acts as a development agency. In Dominican Republic, I was working I was partnered with actually a national park as they were setting up basically their commercial operations, right? So going from what was basically a lot of poaching and kind of mismanagement of the land and illegal logging and things like that, to actually putting together a formal Ministry of Environment trained tour program, right? And that also involved the community, so that the community would act as protectors of the land as well. But my main takeaway, and the reason I spend just a minute on that is because as an American growing up in California, I think what I realized is there's a term in Dominican Spanish that's called chiripeo. And chiripeo is basically odd jobs. And there's such a large part of the population that doesn't have financial stability because they're going from small job to small job. So it's avocado season, so they're harvesting avocado for 3 weeks. Then they're working in construction for a month, and then they're working surge during a factory, when the factory needs extra supply. And without having stable income and without being able to build a financial profile, their only option when sickness hits, when there's problems in financial difficulties, is going through informal channels where the interest rates are 20-25% a month, right? And so even back in Peace Corps, I realized that access to financial services is for those that don't have what is considered a bankable history, can be really painful. And so that's always been in my mind. I was a consultant for a while after grad school. That's where Amrita and I got to meet each other. That was very not emerging market. We did a little bit in Latin America, but it was a lot of big corporate kind of transformation stuff. Typical management consulting, which is great for skill building, but it feels a bit removed from the real world sometimes. And after 3 years of that, I transferred within the same firm, Booz & Company. I transferred to the Malaysia office. That's where I was doing a lot more, back to doing a lot more economic development work, through public-private kind of projects, as well as some kind of core economic development work, which is great. From there, I was kind of eager to get even more into an operations type role. I worked for an investment fund that was part looking at deals and part looking at tech startups around Southeast Asia. And when I was there, it was a year of kind of looking at technology deals around the region and starting to generate my own list of big problems to be solved. And I came back to this idea of financial access. And what I was seeing was there are so many, especially in consumer banking in Southeast Asia, there's a huge part of the population that many banks just consider not worth it, right? And this is why in the Philippines, there's 70% unbanked population. In Indonesia, it's somewhere around 60%. And basically, these are the large incumbent institutions saying, not worth it. They're too expensive. They're too fussy as a customer group. Why don't we just focus on our bread and butter corporate banking, right? And so that it was from that sort of observation that we identified that there's, by building API technology to support banks and online merchants, what it can actually do is change the economics to make it worth it to bank consumers and SMEs in a way that it wouldn't be when you have to set up the branch infrastructure and the, you know, all the kind of the brick and mortar, very expensive OpEx in order to serve those customers. Which is part of the why we're working with UnionBank, is because I think UnionBank realizes that digital first is not only great for kind of helping for growth, but it also helps with distribution, commercialization, and attracting new customers. And I think, so maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I think, yeah, that's a bit of background from my side.
Thank you very much, Todd. And you talked a little bit about what Brankas does. Do you want to expand a little bit before we go to Arvie? Sure.
So very briefly, Brankas is, we like to think we're solving the last mile for open banking. And the last mile for, open banking, generally speaking, is basically enabling customers to access and interact with their bank accounts through third-party channels if they choose, if they want that connection. So whether that's linking my UnionBank to my Gcash e-wallet, or allowing for kind of an aggregated view so I can see my account activity across banks, that's what open banking enables. In emerging markets, and Arvie and I have talked a bunch about this, is providing simply a set of bank APIs is basically not good enough in many emerging markets, because there's whether you're a corporate client of the bank or whether you're a fintech starting out or an e-commerce site, you might not have the developers on hand or the kind of technical capability to just read through UnionBank's developer portal and plug in the APIs directly, right? Often what you need is a little bit more handholding. You need connectors and dashboards and other front-end tools that make it much, much easier for you to access bank APIs. And so that's what Brankas does. On the one side, we work with banks like UnionBank to enable them to commercialize and distribute their APIs. And on the other side, we work on the user side to make sure it's as easy to plug in and access bank API products as possible.
Great, thank you so much, Todd, for sharing all of that. I do want to turn it over to Arvie, because your background and your role at UnionBank is quite different. While Todd was bouncing around all over the world, I believe you have spent the last 10 years at UnionBank. So I'm curious to know how you found your way to UnionBank, 10 years ago, and then how both you and UnionBank have evolved over the last 10 years, especially as you've seen this explosion in fintech all over Southeast Asia.
Okay, thank you for that, Amrita. And well, to be totally honest, I didn't want to go back to banking 10 years ago. I had started my career in a bank. I had started in Citibank. I had spent quite some time there, and at the end of mid 2005, I wanted to shift out. I wanted to do something a little more innovative. I felt that banking wasn't innovative, and if you think about it, in 2000, 1999, there's nothing innovative about banking then, and fintech was not even a thought, right? So I found it very, very, very structured, and I thought I wanted to be more innovation. So telco and media were my next immediate roles. So I got to work with a telco that has an Asia Pacific reach. I got to work with a media company as well that was exploring new technology. So that really was the foundation of what I brought to Union. And coming to that point, 10 years ago, the spiel was we were going to transform banking. So I didn't want to go back to traditional banking, but what was really encouraging with us, I was joining a bank that was about to embark on this digital transformation and strategy. And we did. We started it 10 years ago. And one of the first learnings I got 10 years after is that apparently digital is the last piece of it. First of all, it's a cultural transformation. You have to really change the mindset, change the behavior, change the thinking. And so it's been a very fruitful process, but we're, painful as well. But we're by no means done. Sadly, most people think transformation is a destination, but it's really a continuous, ongoing journey. And now the transformation has to pivot, accelerate the pivot somewhat. But it's been a very interesting journey where we've taken the bank from just really a traditional bank to now more a technology company layered with banking services. And that's where we want to take it moving forward. I think we were talking about the philosophy of open banking even before open banking became a buzzword. We felt that as banks, we were just the trusted custodian of your money, of your identity. And in a future where everything is now interconnected and interoperable, we think we still have a very vital role to play in that new world where we will still be the trusted curator of fintechs, of partners, of services, and we will be a platform where we can handle both identity, data, and your money as well. So it's that open banking philosophy which we carry forward. Also being a mid-sized bank, we saw very early on that this transformation was not about doing everything yourself. I think we came to terms with that very early on, that this is about collaborating with as many partners as possible, because our country itself is such a complicated archipelago that no one institution alone can do it. If that were so, then we wouldn't have 70% unbanked. But that's very clear now. Not one institution can do it. Maybe combined, we all have a chance at cracking this nut. So very early on, our philosophy was really about building technology capabilities, some ourselves, but some definitely extending it through partners to be able to reach more. And so that's what we're doing now, and that's what brings us to this context where we're now a bank that's really trying to be a platform to allow our customers access to all these different services, financial or otherwise, because banking is a horizontal that cuts across many different industries, really, rather than a vertical. So that's what we try to enable, so that we can continue to keep giving our customers access to different platforms, different services, be it a corporate customer or a retail customer. Ideally, he's going to want to obviously keep his money with a trusted institution, but also give that money interoperable access together with his data. And so we're building platforms along that philosophy and connectivity.
Got it. Thank you, Arvie. I also wanted to ask the FinTech business group, which you lead, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the work that you do, the types of APIs that you onboard. And then also, I believe that UnionBank is structured a little bit differently compared to a lot of other banks in Southeast Asia. So if you could tell us a little bit about how the FinTech business group fits into the broader organization.
Okay. Yes, thanks for reminding me about that. So 3 years ago, when we formally established the FinTech business group, the mandate was really to work with fintechs. We felt that we wanted to have, in much the same way where you have a traditional bank, have segments catering to large corporates, SMEs, entrepreneurs, startups. We felt that the fintechs required a specific center of focus and excellence as well. So with that, our mandate is to work with any and all fintechs and startups. At the very, our strategy is a bit of a pyramid. At the very base layer, every fintech needs a bank. Fintech startup, if you are in operation, you will need a bank. As I said, it's a horizontal. You're going to need it for your basic services. So we wanted to first and foremost be the basic bank of choice for any and all fintechs there. We wanted to be the bank that spoke their language. And therefore, if you're going to open a new account and you're a fintech, we'd like you to do it digitally. We don't want you to sign papers, the new way of working. And at that very base layer, the banking, the fintechs, and the startups, we found quite a bit of success because there are many startups, fintechs, e-commerce platforms that do want to speak to bankers who speak their language, right? These guys are opening accounts, and nothing in their legacy, nothing in their process speaks legacy and say, oh yeah, I want to write 1,000 checks to suppliers. No, I want to make 1,000 API calls to direct effect payments to them, right? So it's a new process altogether. So we found ourselves in a way niche in that space where we were catering to them. But other than banking them, there are certain fintechs that we want to work a little bit more deeply with. I guess there's synergies that can be derived, such as what we're doing with Brankas, where we can help each other and we can achieve both our goals. And we're also actually progressing towards the same objective, right? Which is to tech up businesses to enable them with APIs. And so there are fintechs that we work closely with. And those synergies might result in a new product, a new service altogether. And when that matures, the last two parts of our pyramid would be to possibly invest in those fintechs. If they're of such strategic value and we are deriving a synergy, we might look to invest in them. But the more challenging part, Amrita, comes after investing them is to reintegrate this capability back into the bank. So if we are able to capture this synergy, basically scale it, we have to make sure that it becomes a basic feature of the main bank as well. So the fintechs group mandate is eventually to also transform the way the main bank works. So that's in a nutshell what we do and how we cover it.
And I have to emphasize how different what Arvie is describing is, how different that is from other bank partners or your typical bank in Southeast Asia, where not even a fintech, if I'm a digital company needing banking services, as Arvie described, and I don't want to write 1,000 checks or do some batch transfer in order to process payables, and I want an integrated API that's plugged into my application so that I can, automate paying sellers. That just to find out if that product exists would be, maybe I have a relationship manager, they're running around the bank, they're seeing if this is available. Maybe they're doing something custom, which is going to be on a 6-month roadmap. If I'm big enough, if I'm not big enough, then they're saying, well, you're an online business, so maybe that's additional risk. So maybe we're not too keen on it. And by the way, mainly we're serving large corporates, and large corporates want a human interaction and they visit branches. So why are we bothering with you? You're a lot of fuss, right? And so to have a dedicated team up to the C-level that is focused on banking products and services to support online businesses is I imagine the cultural change in order to get to that point was quite heavy, and it's one of the only organizations I've seen in FIs in the region that I've seen that have that structure. Even if there's a digital team, every bank will have some digital team, but what that digital team is actually able to execute on and make tough decisions, right? It's not too common.
If I can just add to that, Todd, I guess if you ask us why, above the culture is purpose, right? So very early on, even before all this technology, we called out our purpose, and you know that very well. Tito calls it Ubuntu, which is an African Zulu word for community. So we've always held that banking is about enabling communities, and that's circa 1999. 2005, 2010, 2020, that still holds true today. I mean, the platforms of today are still enabling communities, right? So that purpose has held us through thick and thin, especially when it gets difficult. And it will get difficult. And you ask, why am I doing this? What for? And many do give way and give up, because 74% of transformations do fail, which is why I'm also quick to say we're not by all means in the clear and done, right? But I caution that when it gets tough and you question why, you better have anchored yourself on a purpose that keeps your culture sane so that you can actually follow through with the rest of it.
Guys, thank you both for sharing your backgrounds and kind of your motivations for being in this space. I think it's probably a good time to turn our attention over to open banking. I think let's actually go to one of our audience members who has a question, whose phrase is better than I could. Open banking in the US is mainly market driven. In UK, it is mainly led by regulation, GDPR and PS2D, D2, always mix that up. What model will the Philippines take as open banking frameworks proliferate globally? And that question is from Dan. Dan, thank you very much for your question.
Yeah, well, I'll start with just a quick comment, which is, so Arvie's probably talked, we're in touch with the Bangko Sentral, the Philippine Central Bank. I think they are thinking through what the open banking policy framework will look like. Indonesia is doing the same thing. They just released their very first draft policy paper like 3 or 4 weeks ago and circulated it for comments. I am not expecting a top-down mandate for open banking, anything resembling Europe anytime soon. And there are several reasons for that, which is another discussion in itself. But I think the message for open banking in emerging markets generally, and in the Philippines specifically, is we're in like version 0.1, right? And version 0.1 is enabling customers to do very basic activities, banking activities through using API technology, right? And the very basic activities are things like identity and authentication, being able to validate that, yes, I am a customer of this bank. This bank has already done KYC for me, and then this KYC can actually serve as authenticating elsewhere, right? So I can transport my identity verification elsewhere. Number 2 is payments. And payments is that, UnionBank was, I think, the first bank to provide e-wallet integration. So if I want to top up my e-wallet, I've already linked my UnionBank account, and that is a true open banking use case, right? Where I've linked my UnionBank account to my e-wallet, and whenever I want to pull funds in or transfer money out, I've already authenticated my device to the account, and all I have to do is approve the transfer. So 1 is identity, 2 is payments, and 3 is statement data. So the Philippines, like many markets, does not have a reliable credit bureau. And so any lender that wanting to evaluate my creditworthiness will need to see my bank statements. That is the primary source of kind of credit scoring data. And so what we're seeing, like what does open banking look like in a market like the Philippines? We're seeing the super basic version 1 use cases around payments, statements, and authentication. And Arvie, maybe you've seen something else.
No, I fully agree with your point, and I'm going to zero in on you're not probably going to see a top-down mandate like you see in other areas. I'll speak to that because the regulator here is very supportive of the different, I guess, tactical executions of open banking. You can see what we've done in NRPS, PesoNet. Those are all mechanisms that really enable open banking. But Todd, they're also very new, right? I mean, I'm very proud of what we've done in PesoNet InstaPay, but that's only about 2 years old. I mean, it's 2020, 2018. You couldn't transfer to other banks until then.
It was checks.
It was checks, right?
Or you send a runner to the branch, which is like, yeah.
So, but there is progress, and a lot of that is being pushed by the regulator. I'm very happy with the way they've been. It might not come from them pushing it downward, but they've always been encouraging the banks and the different FIs to really push. And they have enough of the circulars and the frameworks around. All the regulation is in place to allow you to stitch together open banking solutions, which is how we have been able to operate. Obviously, we do what we do within the regulatory framework of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. So it's all there. All the existing frameworks will allow some pieces. I mean, but that is correct. It's still at the very basic, right? But these are the baby steps we're taking. And that's not to say that the regulatory environment isn't very supportive. If you engage them and if it is in that direction, you might be surprised at how supportive they are. And I don't think they have, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Todd, but I don't think they've rejected anything in this area. In fact, if anything, they've always encouraged banks, FIs, even fintechs to submit because they cannot also regulate in a vacuum, right? They will not just submit, they will not just do a top-down initiative. They give them something to reject or approve. And more often than not, when it's innovative, when it's supporting of open banking, financial inclusion, even if it's totally left field, as long as it covers the risks, the regulators have been able to approve it, even at the sandbox level. So I'm very supportive. I'm very grateful for the support that they've been giving us. But you're right, Todd, still at the very beginning. And we'll see more and more use cases that will start to really increase the adoption of these technologies and promote further open banking as well.
Yeah. So I'll just echo that. Yeah, the BSP has been, and I will say even more than other regulators in the region they're actually extremely curious, extremely eager to learn what the use cases are and how they can be enablers, rather than simply top down, you can do this, you can't do that. It's a good model.
Yep.
Guys, I am curious, what are some of the specifics around policies from the BSP, especially around open banking frameworks, that have either made your life much easier? It sounds like many of them have, but any that have made your life a little less easy, I think that would be helpful.
Well, they continue to, I mean, all of the circulars around electronic money, around the virtual currency exchange, around agency banking. I mean, even the infrastructure that we have in the PesoNet InstaPay, actually even the governing body of PesoNet InstaPay, the NRPS, the way that's been set up, where you have the banks and the wallets finally involved in the governance of these ACHs. I can't speak to anyone specifically because they are very much tied up together. But suffice to say that a lot of them will rely on, obviously, falling back to the bank, being a universal bank, having a universal bank license, being able to do all the KYC, being able to properly handle all the risks. It falls back into that responsibility where we have to take care of the consumer and the trust that's been given to us. But I can't, Amrita, if you ask me to point to one specific, I can't. There are many circulars that really, when properly stitched together, and that's what we see whenever we present something to the BSP, be it a mobile app that does complete digital account opening, whether it be just third-party KYC reliance, which Todd was referring to, right? I'm a bank, I've already KYC'd Todd, I don't need to KYC him elsewhere. I don't, Grab can take my word for it because I'm a bank, right? These different regulations have all allowed for many pieces of open banking. And so I would dare say that the Todd, even if we're at 1.0, we actually have the pieces, and it's on us, the banks and fintechs, to really put it forward to the regulators and say, look, I want to do this. Surprisingly, I don't think I'll get in trouble, but they haven't said no to anything we've said in the past couple of years. I mean, if you put it forward properly packaged, and let me just be clear, it's not like you submit it. It's a constant dialogue with the regulators. We are dialoguing with them until we finally submit a paper form or an email form of approval. But otherwise, it's a continuous dialogue with the regulator. Can I do this? Can I do that? Can I do that? I mean, which is what's led to some of the more crazy innovations that, like in blockchain, we have a fully functioning blockchain rural bank platform. We have a stable coin running into it. Those are all approved by the regulator. Possible because you have that dialogue as you work through what you want to develop.
Yeah, that's amazing. We've actually got quite a few questions asking from the audience about, how does this work outside of the Philippines, other countries in Southeast Asia? I know Todd, Brankas is active in a few other markets. What are you seeing with regulators? Are they taking a similar approach, stitching together a framework for APIs, or is it a little bit different? And perhaps is there a way to apply what's going on in the Philippines to the rest of Southeast Asia?
With the usual caveats that every country is different, every regulator is different, blah, blah, blah. But I think generally what we're seeing is a bottom-up approach where the regulator is providing sort of gentle encouragement and not being too top-down. So the regulators that we've worked with closely are Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines. And I think Vietnam is even earlier on sort of evaluating open banking frameworks, but they're all in the same position, I think, where there is recognition. So this is a more general comment. I think there's recognition across financial institutions and the regulators that open banking is something to understand and pay attention to, and will be a big wave of new startups, new FIs, new regulations required, new risks, new fraud models that need to be addressed. Like this is going to become a big part of a central bank's activity, regulatory activity, and it's going to become an increasing part of banks and other financial service providers in the future. So there's a lot of eagerness to learn. So we've done a lot of workshops with BOT in Thailand, with BI in Indonesia, and with BSP, and they range from the kind of best practices, like here's the model, here are the models in the UK and EU, here's the sort of commercially led model in the US, given what we've observed and where FIs and fintechs want to have kind of more clear rules of the road. Here's what we're hearing from the market, and just sharing kind of a commercial and product point of view. And then my CTO, Ken, often will give a kind of a security-based view on what a proper IT security standards look like to make sure that you're encouraging innovation while also making sure that you're not unduly exposed to bad behavior. But yeah, the general answer to that is I don't expect that there's going to be any top-down mandates anytime soon. I know, for example, in Thailand, they're looking at doing a pilot for bank statement aggregation. In Indonesia, they're still reviewing kind of what the policy framework is going to be and whether or not there's going to be new licenses, whether that's going to take the AISP, PISP framework, licensing framework in Europe. So it's all, I mean, we're several months, if not years away from the first, from any sort of umbrella regulation around open banking products. So that's why I echo what Arvie says. I think the name of the game for banks and for fintechs is to be proactive, share with the regulator what you're doing, make it clear how you're protecting things like user consent, user privacy, compliance with local data restrictions, compliance with local data privacy management restrictions, and just, take it, if you take kind of a risk back point of view and you say, here's what we want to do, this is beneficial to customers, this is beneficial to the ecosystem generally, here are the precautions we're taking, here are specific things where we would love the regulator's input because it's creating some nervousness on the part of our customers or the FIs we partner with. That is the approach that's worked best for us. Yeah, across the region. So what Arvie's described for the Philippines is not, it's not unique for Southeast Asia. I think it represents more or less what the regulator mindset is across the region.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I do have to ask about COVID and how this has impacted both of your businesses and open banking. Yeah, Arvie, why don't you go ahead and talk about the COVID impact? Oh, Arvie, you're on mute.
Sorry, sorry about that. No one was really prepared for COVID. If ever, we might have been the one of the few really further along the curve, right? But even then, it caught everyone off guard. That said, the bank, well, we've been able to pivot to a completely work from home setup. We run the bank 90% from home. Good thing our infrastructure allowed us to do that. What was difficult for us was the banking being basic service, and in the Philippines, in an emerging market where you still have a lot of people who are unbanked or not even accessing their bank accounts digitally. The first wave saw a tremendous amount of people wanting to get onboarded onto the digital platforms. And for those who had digital platforms ready and working, it was just a matter of volume and then onboarding them. It becomes a little difficult for other institutions, banks and otherwise, who were just about to launch their digital platforms and therefore had to launch it maybe in a, not in a complete way. So they were struggling. And so they had to really service people in the branch. For us, I guess we were fortunate to have a lot of our customers already digitally enabled, so that was easier to handle. But not to say we were not cognizant of the others. Obviously, we were very aware of having to handhold our other customers, and that's where we spent a lot of time during the immediate lockdown and COVID period. Those who wanted to get onboarded, we had to onboard them quickly so they could use the digital platform. So it's been operationally, it's been challenging for the bank, but I think we were prepared for it. And the question now is, moving forward, how do we accelerate the adoption? And I think that's what's been removed. Fintechs, banks like ourselves trying to do this many times, even at the regulatory level, we've been doing a lot of discussion, thought leadership, but it's all sharing, Todd, right? It's like not really a call to action. I think now the inertia or the resistance has been removed in people's mindsets. They're now not questioning, why. They're now questioning, okay, what do I do and how do I do it? And can I do it yesterday? And that's the discussion that's happening after COVID, which I think is encouraging, because you're going to see regulators, governments move into this. And that's where I think you're going to see really mass adoption, because obviously the government is the biggest user of paper, of checks. And if you have them move on to digital payments, that will really swing the needle. So it's that I guess is the silver lining here post-COVID.
Todd, what's your view?
Yeah, well, it's funny. We were. I won't name names, but we were when the quarantine started in Manila in mid-March. We're of course working with several folks on Arvie's team on various API and kind of open banking initiatives. And it was, we were work from home starting on the 15th or whatever, but it was basically business as usual. Everything's moving along. There's another very large bank where we're working on something very pilot, very early days. And when this happened, it was everything stopped, all new projects stopped, while the bank was A, setting up VPNs for the first time for their staff, and B, procuring as many laptops as possible, because their whole staff was working from desktops inside the bank headquarters, right? So like, while Arvie's team was just moving right along, there were banks down the road that were basically completely operationally stopped. And there were others, by the way, anecdotally hearing from friends about, there were several banks that basically did 0 new account openings for the first several weeks of COVID. 0. They stopped all new customer acquisition because they did not have any means to do digital onboarding, period. Whereas I'm sure Arvie's team has, if you guys haven't disclosed it yet, I'm sure that that acquisition curve looks something like this, right? So whereas other banks, like literally they had to stop. So that's one thing, right? Is that there's really been a bifurcation, and it's really just 2 categories. It's those that already had digital infrastructure to accommodate this sort of work from home, digital environment, and those that had to procure laptops for the first time because everything was on premise, right? And you see the same thing on the user side, right? So users now all of a sudden much more keen to try out digital products for the first time. And then corporates. So we found, there's all sorts of new interesting use cases for corporates that were used to processing thousands of physical checks. And now the check writer machine is at the headquarters. They don't want to have staff at the headquarters. They're on a work from home model. They don't want to run around sending couriers all day long to sign checks. So all of a sudden they need a payables solution that's plugged right into their ERP, right? So there's so overall it's been exciting, but not always in the way that you would expect. But I think fundamentally the change is, and especially in the Philippines, because retail and SME banking has been so branch centric. Finally, the industry generally, not UnionBank, but the industry generally is recognizing that, digital channels are a thing and they're worth investing in, right? Which is kind of funny to say in the year 2020, but that's the reality we observed.
Yeah. I actually think now it sounds like, your cultures at Brankas and certainly in the fintech group at UnionBank, your cultures are quite aligned. So maybe it's a good time to quickly talk about the strategic partnership that you two just announced, I think 2 weeks ago. Real quick, maybe you guys can go talk about what Brankas and UnionBank bring to the table in this partnership and what the impact is for the end user.
Okay, Todd, do you want to go ahead? Go ahead.
Sure. Just briefly, I think what You know, the way Arvie and I have always have talked about it is, you know, Arvie's team he has some awesome developers and product managers, and their core focus is building new API products to serve fintechs and to serve, you know, the broader bank customer base, right? And hopefully attract some new customers in the process, right? Where I think, frankly speaking, where it is not a core competency of the bank is all of the last mile integrations for the less tech savvy customers that need an easier way to use Arvie's APIs, right? So you go to developer.unionbank.ph.com and you're seeing a list of all sorts of very well documented, easy to integrate, easy to use a sandbox, all sorts of use cases, but it's still plugging that into a legacy corporate's, you know, backend workflow. Or if you're like an early stage Philippine startup and you have very few developers on hand, most of whom are more comfortable working with kind of ready to use frameworks, it may take them too long, or it may just be too complicated given their kind of capability level to use and integrate with an API directly. What they need is a little bit more handholding than you might expect in another market, right? And so that's where Brankas comes in. So Brankas is, we think of ourselves as a go-to-market partner or a last mile partner to UnionBank, making it easier and easier and easier for customers of the bank, corporate customers, SME customers, to have access to fintech group products.
I saw that early on when our challenges were, you know, well, working with corporates, no, some do have IT departments, but then again, you know, you look at their APIs and that's not exactly how it should be. You know, they think they have APIs, but apparently that's not done properly. And so their concept of APIs is also, I don't know if the right word is dated, Todd, or just completely wrong, right? But you have a set of customers that way, and you can't say, oh, okay, no, you know, you figure that out yourselves. You really have to handhold these guys. So either we've done this all our lives, even with the old, you know, SFTP, host-to-host connectivity. Sometimes, you know, we had to do all that plumbing ourselves just to get the customer connected. And if we have to do that now in an API world, we saw that, you know what, we'll do it. So some of them, number one, if they have technical IT units, their APIs might not be properly done. Second, they have to be properly integrated, which they might not be capable of doing. But you know, Amrita and Todd, I'm sure you know this, majority apparently of corporates or even SMEs don't have formal IT teams. They rely on outsourced providers. And so when you do that, and you're talking about, you know, creating a pipe that you're going to have API calls on every day, and then it breaks down. Oh, let me call my developer who's on my monthly retainer. You know, that might be 60% of SMEs, MSMEs, and that's the norm. So when Todd says, you know, they're the last mile for that, that's precisely where we need, you know, where we see Brankas fitting nicely, because I cannot obviously service all of those needs. So they're an extension at that level. They're at least an extension of my onboarding team. At the other end of the spectrum, Todd's right. If I'm developing APIs for partners, for fintechs, he has a broader view based on what he's been doing around the region and working with the other fintechs as well, such that if I wanted to create that connectivity, he would actually add value to the way we develop those APIs rather than my team just doing it in a silo, right? So that's the whole spectrum of this partnership. And you know, I don't want to belabor the point, but really, for those who haven't been on the ground here in the Philippines and Todd and other emerging markets, when you say, oh, I have an API connect, it's not that simple. Most of them will really ask you, what's an API? Or where is it? Or how? It's like, you know, it's the files are in the computer. I mean, for majority of them, it's like that. So you have to handhold them. And that's okay, but you have to make sure that you have that mindset that I will handhold them through this process. My worry now, post-COVID, Amrita, Todd, you know this. Everyone and his mother-in-law now wants an API, even if they don't know what it means, right? They want an API for anything and everything, and they think that's their first step in digitization. So there's a lot of hand-holding that will be required there as well as we go along. And that for me is the opportunity. That for me is the opportunity, right? So I would love to, and that's the model we want to push forward. We have to handhold these guys, because once we do that and they're fully onboarded digitally, but there's this painful process of onboarding them. which is where this partnership is definitely focusing on, that part where we want to tech up Philippine enterprises and SMEs.
That is super exciting, guys. Thank you for sharing and congratulations on the partnership. I am going to pause our discussion right now and turn it over to Manish. I realize I went over on time. I want to turn it over to Manish to talk a little bit about the APIX community. And then with whatever time we have left at the end, we will go into audience questions. Go ahead, Manish. Thanks.
Thanks, Amrita. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. And thanks, Todd and Arvie. I knew you guys were rock stars anyway, and just reinstated the fact. Thanks for that talk. Quickly, my 5 minutes of fame on this fantastic panel and the green room. APIX, I'm here to talk about APIX. My name is Manish Diwaan. I had APIX, the Innovation Platform API Exchange. Jean, can you move to the next slide, please? So APIX is essentially a sandbox. We have built a public sandbox which does all sorts of fancy things which help fintechs like Todd, Brankas, and financial institutions like UnionBank to a certain extent, but they are at a very completely different level. They've really outmaneuvered pretty much everybody in town. Anybody who intends to be API friendly and API ready and do experimentations quick and fast on the financial institution side, both utilize the sandbox that we have created. And we also run a global fintech marketplace. We provide data APIs for faster collaboration. We run a solutions catalog, and we run what we call as this APIX open community within the APIX scheme of things. APIX is a not-for-profit entity. Jean, can you move to the next slide? APIX is a not-for-profit entity. We are based out of Singapore. We have some very, very illustrious names who help and support the APIX community and the APIX platform, including ASEAN Bankers Association, IFC World Bank, Monetary Authority of Singapore, AMTD, Foundation Hong Kong, and MasterCard, and a brilliant set of strategic advisory council members, including Singapore FinTech Association, MasterCard, and the very cool Brankas guys on the panel today, Todd. Todd also, by the way, is responsible for our community outreach on the fintech side, and also helps manages the fintech's the open community platform that we run, along with Bank of New York Mellon, AWS, AMTD, and Experian, and of course, a consortium partner, Virtusa, Deloitte, Percipient, and Fedor. So APIX is not just a platform, it's much bigger than a platform. It helps you collaborate faster between fintechs and financial institutions. It also, energizes the community with all these great names associated. We are currently running a fantastic program for our fintechs based out of Singapore, which is the APIX Care program in association with MAS, Prudential, and AWS, where we are giving, MAS is providing some fantastic grant schemes. The friends in Prudential, they have allowed for a new, COVID-19 related life insurance scheme for free of charge for the employees of fintech companies. And there are cloud credits anywhere between $5,000 to $25,000 from AWS for any member on the fintech community on APIX. Move to the next slide, please. We are currently running these two very important schemes on the APIX platform, which are there as part of our support system, APIX being a part of the support system that is being managed from MAS and from Singapore FinTech Association and AMTD. The one which you see, which is the MAS SFA AMTD grant scheme. This is meant only for fintechs who are registered in Singapore. And the Solidarity Investment Scheme, which is a $50 million fund that has been created for the ASEAN fintech community. So if we have fintechs from non-Singapore fintechs on this webinar today, all of you can participate in the Solidarity Investment Scheme, where you can come on board the APIX platform, complete your profile, upload your APIs or your solution as the case may be, and qualify and apply for the investment scheme. There's $50 million Singapore dollar fund that has been created by AMTD, who is the member on the board for us. Next slide, please. Any fintech who comes on board, like I said, they get special crowd credits from our associate partners, our advisory council members, AWS and also Google Clouds. And also they get workspace promotions from our friends in Ascendas in Bridge. Next slide, please. And this is something that I would like to talk about today in a little bit, maybe 2-minute detailing. I had only 5 minutes to begin with. Apex Online Community, which is an open community platform that we have created for interactions, not just within the members of the Apex community, but for third-party developers, for engineers, from academicians, from students, anybody who has any interest in this field of technology, fintech, APIs, blockchain, crypto, whatnot. It's as greenfield as the green room. You join the conversations. There is no charge for it. You come by, you create your own pages if something of interest. People will take it forward. We want this community to be helping each other, and especially during these very, very difficult times of COVID. And I think one of the panelists was mentioning, people, these things are completely unexpected. What we are dealing with today, and I think as a community, it's important that we bind together, that we do together, and take these conversations forward, not just in these troubled times, but also beyond that. It needs to materialize into good projects, good products and services, and that's what essentially Apex Online Community allows you to do. So we run the Apex platform, which is a membership-based organization, and we run the Apex Online Community, which is a free of cost community exchange program. I think that should be all from my side. My name is Manish Diwaan, and you could reach out to us and do visit the apexplatform.com. That should be all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Manish. That's great. It's the Apex community is a really important one and is what is making all of this possible. So I want to.
And both UnionBank and Brankas are quite active. I know UnionBank was one of the early participants on the FI side, and then Brankas is supporting them as well. And so, kind of where Arvie and I are talking Philippines, what Manish is driving is an Asia-wide kind of community to support these basically new financial technology partnerships between FIs and fintechs. Because as Arvie and I have talked about, it's not always as easy as going to the fintech group and knocking on the door and saying, "Hey, help us out." It's usually much more complicated and fussy than that. So Apex helps kind of unblock some of these POC pilot and test partnerships between fintechs and FIs.
Guys, we do have quite a lot of questions from the audience. We are definitely not going to get to all of them. So for the last 3 minutes, I'm going to combine a few of the questions, and you will each have 1 minute, no longer than 1 minute to answer them. So here we go. How do you see open banking versus banking as a service? Who do you think is ahead of the game in Asia? What pushback have you seen from existing lenders or payments companies such as Grab Financial in the market? And I think that's it. Pick one of those questions. Arvie, you go first.
What was the third one? What was the last question?
There's open banking versus banking as a service.
Open banking versus
something about lenders.
What was the second question? Who do you think is ahead of the game in Asia, and what pushback have you seen from the market?
Okay, let me take 2 and 3. There are a lot of players who are ahead, in terms of, I don't think I should name them here, but in each country there are some banks that are really, I guess, ahead of the pack, and their lead is not just because they have a mobile banking app or they have an API platform, but they're really thinking and moving in a totally different direction versus the others who are lagging behind. The good thing is now the inertia has shifted. I think those who are lagging behind have no choice, and this is the part that that in a way, I guess, excites me, because I guess it goes back to that question about why we spent a lot of our time. I think Manish, Todd, myself, the past 2-3 years, we kind of spent our time convincing people, right, that this is the way to go. I mean, that time is done, guys. I mean, now we have the burden of now, just taking the deluge of people who want to do this, which is a good problem to have. So I think the landscape will change dramatically, and that's the exciting part. You're going to see the laggards start to immediately emerge, and regulation that used to take 3 to 6 months, you'll see it now faster because of all of this situation. You now have regulation that can be approved in 2 to 3 weeks, and you're going to see a lot more adoption and a lot more scaling up from these guys. So it's very exciting to see, but I don't think the verdict's out yet. Either way, moving forward, it has to be collaborative. I think, let me end with that. Everyone has to kind of work together, have an open mindset, and realize you should not do everything yourself.
Thanks, Arvie. Todd?
Yeah. So I guess I'll tackle the first one. I mean, part of the challenge here is these definitions are brand new. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of the conversation around cloud like 10 years ago, where it's like, oh, are you on cloud? Yeah, I'm on cloud. I don't know about cloud. Is cloud secure? Well, that means 100 different things. And it's not one, like going cloud does not mean one single thing. So it's similar thing here. I think where definitions have to be pulled apart a little bit. Open banking and banking is, so open banking, I think if you want to understand what open banking is, I mean, look to the UK and the EU, because that's the kind of clear model, and that's top down defined by the regulator. And it's basically, I as a bank customer should not be limited to the channels that the bank gives me. I should be able to link my account, link my data, link my identity to third-party, online identity to third-party apps, qualified third-party apps, right? Banking as a service is, I see it as the approach, and Arvie can help me out with the definition here, but banking as a service is, I see it as providing banking services, not necessarily through a vertically integrated shop, right? So a bank today, especially a typical Philippines bank, is like, I can only access the bank through its channels, which is branch, ATM, online, phone, web, whatever. I can only access the products of the bank, right? And I can only have access to certain products depending on what kind of the requirements that the bank gives me. Banking as a service is, I want to have X type of product. Now that may be delivered by some third-party fintech. It might be delivered by some one of my favorite apps. And then the actual bank license is provided by someone else, and it's being provided as a service, white labeled to a third party, right? So it's yeah, and I think Standard Chartered with their Nexus project is doing something like this. It's not quite live, so I will withhold further commentary. But it certainly seems from the public information available, it certainly seems that they are. That the Nexus project is taking a banking as a service approach. But I think that, as Arvie said at the beginning of the talk, more and more, if you are a fintech, you need access to banking services one way or another, for your own systems because you're processing payments, or because you're providing some sort of bank enablement or bank value-added service on top. So either way, you need connectivity to the bank. And so banking as a service kind of makes that, kind of focuses in on that product, I suppose.
Yeah.
Wasn't very eloquent, but you can see it's like hard to pull apart these definitions. Open banking, API banking, right? Banking as a service, platform banking, right?
There's a lot out there. There's a lot to digest. Thank you all. Thank you, Todd and Arvie, for helping us digest some of it. This has been a fascinating discussion for me. I hope the audience has thought so. We are over time. I apologize about that. I do hope that everyone has enjoyed this first series of the Green Room, and I hope you'll join us again for the next one. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Thanks, Amrita. Thanks, guys.